Hi, and welcome to my channel. My name is Lynn, and today I wanted to share with you a compilation of some of my videos on Blackwork Embroidery. I have been studying Blackwork Embroidery for well over 20 years at this point, and so I would like to share with you information on what materials you would need, where to find patterns, how to draft your own pattern, and step-by-step on how to do Blackwork Embroidery. But before we get started, please select thumbs up that you like the video. It helps with the algorithm. If you have any questions or comments, please post them below, and please click subscribe and ring that bell to be updated when new videos come out. So what is blackwork? Blackwork is a reversible embroidery stitch, usually done with silk thread on linen. Blackwork has also been referred to as Holbein stitch, back stitch, Spanish work, festoon stitch, square stitch, or double running stitch. By counting the threads, the double running stitch is a series of 2 journeys. On the first journey, the pattern is to work every other stitch. And with that, you will get an in, out, in, out, in, out pattern. Then on the return journey, you fill in all of the blank spots to create one continuous line. So on the return journey, you will go in, out, in, out, in, out, and the finished product looks like a single line. What materials do you need? A slate frame is historically accurate. However, if you want to use just a round frame, not historically accurate, but it's still, you can still work with it. Or you can also use a scroll frame. I personally advise not to do the scroll frame, but that's just personal preference. I've tried a scroll frame before and had difficulty keeping my tension. If you use a circular hoop frame, the problem with that is, again, with your tension, as you move the hoop frame across your fabric, you tend to warp the linen a bit, and then it makes your stitches uneven. Next, after the frame, you need linen fabric. Blackwork could have been done on other fabrics, such as velvet, but it was primarily done on linen. Also, you need silk thread. There were other types of threads used, such as cotton, but very rarely, and I've actually tried using cotton thread before and found it to be quite difficult. The silk thread, if you have a knot in your thread one way, you just pull the knot in the opposite direction, and the knot comes right out. It's very easy to work with, and it's very pretty. Depending on if you get twisted or untwisted silk thread, you can have an extra shine to it. The cotton thread, I found just if it got twisted up, it got knotted, it was difficult to get the knot out, and it's not as pretty, in my personal opinion. So you've got your slate frame, your fabric, your thread. You also need a needle. Beeswax is optional, but I highly recommend it, at least for the ends of your threads, to help your thread not fray. And you need to decide on the pattern. What is a slate frame? A slate frame is just simply a box frame where you stitch your fabric in the middle of the frame. And it helps keep the tension on all 4 sides. If you look on the page here, on the left-hand side, you will see an example of silk embroidery being done in 1568, and that's a German picture there. In the middle is what a slate frame looks like today. And on the right-hand side is a painting by Francesco Casa from about the late 1400s. And again, you can see the slate frame, but also if you look, it looks like there's legs on the slate frame, so it could be used almost like a table. What type of needle do you use? If you look on the left-hand side, there's an enhanced portrait of Costanza. I'll probably mispronounce this, and please correct me if I do mispronounce this, Costanza Cantani. And that's also from the late 1400s. And in that portrait, you see her with pins, a thimble, and sewing needle. For my black work, I usually just typically use the same type of needle like what you would use in today's modern cross stitch, but that's what I use. On the right hand side of the screen, you will see Viking era needles, and that's from Coppergate. The one thing you have to make sure of is if the eye of your needle is larger than the pointy end of your needle, then that might warp the linen a bit. So you want a needle that is about as straight as possible, where the eye is not any bigger than the rest of the needle. That way it doesn't warp the thread at all and warp your fabric at all and create holes in your fabric. You also want to use a very thin needle for the same reason. What type of silk thread? I recommend using, and I'll probably mispronounce this, soie perle. This is a twisted silk thread that only needs beeswax applied to the ends of the threads. There is also the soie ovale. If I mispronounced that, please let me know. And the soie ovale is an untwisted silk thread. This thread is shinier than the soie perle, but it also frays a lot more. I can show you examples of that later in this class. So the soie ovale is shinier and prettier looking, but with that one you really want to use the beeswax on it because it will fray, and the backside, it will look like a mess after a while. For Egyptian threads, blue, red, and brown, the brown could be faded black, or common embroidery threads used in pre-15th century Egypt embroidery. The brown threads that we see in examples in museums may have originally been black, since the iron used to dye the threads can fade over time as well as erode the thread. Black silk thread on white linen was definitely the most popular and the most favored in Europe. Red thread was occasionally used, as we saw previously in Bess of Hardwicke's sleeves. In England, gold and silver threads were also used. However, a person had to be careful when using gold or silver threads due to the sumptuary laws. Among the restrictions listed in Elizabeth I's 1574 statute was that for gold, silver, or pearl embroidery, it was reserved for only dukes, marquises, earls, including the children of all three, viscounts, barons, and knights of the garter. Here's an example of a woman's Italian shirt from the late 16th century. This example is in the Textile Museum in Prato. And one of the things that I find neat about this shirt is not only is there black work on the cuffs and around the collar, but it's also going up the sleeves. If you look where the sleeves join the shirt, there on that seam, there's blackwork embroidery on all of the seams. So where there are gores on the sides, down the front, and on the sides going towards the bottom hem, there's more black work on all of the seams. I think it helps give it character. I love it. Can Gutermann silk thread be used? Gutermann silk thread can be purchased at Joann Fabrics or any local fabric store. It's machine washable, and it's a nice thread to begin learning blackwork on, especially if you can buy it cheaply with a coupon. I know Joann Fabrics a lot of times has like a 40% off coupon, which makes the Gutermann silk thread ideal as a learning tool. Plus, it's machine washable. If, for example, if you look on the bottom right in that picture, those are cuffs I made for my son's shirt when he was, I believe, 4 years old. He was still able to fit in that shirt when he turned 6, and he did youth combat in the SCA wearing that shirt. Now you can just imagine how much sweat and dirt went into that linen shirt that he wore. And because I used Gutermann silk thread on that shirt, I was able to machine wash it and keep it white, amazingly. However, as far as using Gutermann silk thread or not using Gutermann silk thread, if you're aiming for historical accuracy or you want a more bold thread, then I would not recommend using this. The Gutermann silk thread tends to be very thin, and so you can see it up close, to see the pattern, but as you step away, you cannot see the person's pattern as easily because it is very thin. And also, like I said, for historical accuracy, you would want a bold thread. That way, when you're standing more than 6 feet away from someone, they can still see the embroidery and actually see the pattern, and then they can compliment you on, wow, look at that pattern. What items were embroidered? The Moorish embroidery had been used to decorate various household items such as towels, napkins, and cushion covers, as well as garments such as robes and veils. In Europe, clothes were embroidered, such as shirt sleeves, ruffs, cuffs, coifs, doublets, nightcaps, falling bands, along with handkerchiefs. Part of this was to do embroidery. It takes a lot of time, especially if you are doing blackwork embroidery on sleeves, on the fourth part of a skirt. That takes a lot of time. And so they like to wear their wealth. And if you can afford to just simply sit there and do embroidery all day, then that means you have lots of luxury. You have extra time on your hands. And so aside from your pearls, your velvets, your furs, depending on your station, you would also show off the blackwork embroidery. What about a pattern? On the left-hand side is a 16th century Italian sampler from the Victoria and Albert Museum. And with this sampler, I will put the link in the description below, but there is a website out there and they have, I believe it is 25 to 30 patterns that have been recreated from this sampler. And then on the right-hand side is Jane Bostock's English sampler from 1598, and that is also at the Victoria and Albert Museum. One of the nice things with using a sampler is you can sit and pick out which pattern you want to use for your particular item. So if you want to embroider cuffs, I can look at this and I could recreate that specific pattern, or I can use it as inspiration while creating my own pattern. Now, if you're just starting out, I suggest to start with a simple pattern. On the top left-hand side is a pattern from Egypt. It's about circa 13th to 14th century. It is blue silk on linen. I believe it's unbleached linen. And if you look, it's just got a simple line on top. And then right below that is another simple line. And then a little zigzaggy pattern going from the top left, zigzag on the diagonal to the bottom right. And then 2 more straight lines underneath that. Fairly simple as far as blackwork patterns go. On the right-hand side is Nicholas Basset's new model book pattern, which is German. It's from 1568. And with this pattern, it just looks like crosses, one right after the other. Again, fairly simple. With this pattern, unlike the one on the left, the Nicholas Basset's pattern, you can use probably using just one thread. So you would just go on your first journey, left to right, and then on your return journey, going right to left, and your pattern's done. On the bottom is the portrait of a lady as Saint Lucy by Giovanni Antonio Boltraffio. It's from about 1509, and that's at the, sorry if I mispronounced this, Thyssen Bornemisma Museo Nacional in Madrid, Spain. And as far as blackwork embroidery, I think this is the most simple pattern. If you look right on the edge of her collar, beneath the necklace, you'll see the necklace, a little bit of skin, and then the square neckline of her dress. And right on the edge of that square neckline is a single dashed line. About as simple as you can get for black work. So how do you begin? First, you want to weave your thread in and out, typically through the fabric. I shouldn't say typically, sorry. Going ahead of myself. Yes, so first you want to weave your thread in and out through the fabric. Typically, I work left to right, and I count approximately every third or fifth hole per stitch in the linen fabric. Later, I can show you the differences between every third hole and every fifth hole, because that will then determine how small or how big your pattern is. And once you are at the end of the line, then the return journey begins, and that's where you fill in the spaces. And then when you are done, you want to weave the tail of the thread into the pattern on the underneath side. You also do this at the very beginning when you start off. So when you start off, you'll have a little bit of the tail on the underneath side, and you'll just weave it into the pattern as you go left to right, and then return, and then the end of your thread gets woven in at the same place your tail was. If you're in the middle of a pattern, you might be able to split it, part on the left, part on the right, but I can get into more of that later. Another option is to tie a knot at the end of your thread. However, if you do tie a knot, there are a couple of issues you may want to know about. One, depending on how big or how small you tie your knot, if it's small and you machine wash your fabric, that knot may pull through the fabric, and now you've lost part of your pattern. The other thing is, if you want your pattern to be completely reversible on both sides, depending on how many stitches your pattern was, where your knot is may not be at the exact starting place as where your thread started. So on the underneath side, you might have a knot here and a knot here, and a space in between where there should be another stitch. Again, personal preference. I have known some people to knot their threads, and they like to do it. I just recommend testing out and see what works for you. On the picture here, you will see at the very top, the pattern is that simple line that I mentioned on the last screen. That was on the square neckline. It's just a single line. And so to start off, here you have the dashed look of in, out, in, out, in, out. And then when you get to the end of your, whatever it is you're embroidering, the end of your cuff, collar, whatever, then you start your return journey, and now you go back right to left, back to where you began. And again, you do the in, out pattern. And in the end, you have a complete picture. So again, what do you do with the end of your thread? On the far left-hand side, you can see where I had just done a quick sampler. And on that sampler, I was testing out different silk threads. The very top thread is the Gutermann silk thread. And then the middle, I believe that one was the untwisted silk thread. And then the third one down was the twisted silk thread. That's the differences between the soie ovale and the soie perlée. But I was also testing out the differences between beeswax on all of the thread, just on the tail ends, or no beeswax at all. That's why there's 3 sections of 3. But for my quick sampler, you can see where I wove the tail ends into the underneath side of the pattern. If you want to try to be a little more neat, in the center section, or the center picture, it's the back side of a sampler by Elizabeth Burton, about 1701. So I know that's out of the time period for the SCA because we only go up to the 16th century. But anyways, the backside of this sampler, it's from 1701. It's in the Philadelphia Museum of Art. But as you can see, you can see where some of the tail ends are, but for the most part, to me, this looks fairly neat and pretty. On the right-hand side is a collar I had done, and that is with the soie ovale silk thread. And with that, there's no beeswax on the tail ends of the fabric. or on the thread, and that's where I learned the hard way to use beeswax on the tail ends of your thread. After you've embroidered your piece, then attach it to your garment. On the left-hand side, you will see where I embroidered the cuffs and the collar for a shirt, and then I cut it off of the slate frame and I attached it to a shirt for my husband. Now, onto European embroidery. This does say 15th to 17th centuries, but primarily I'm going to be focusing on the 16th and 17th centuries. Here is an Italian example. This is from an embroidery book, and on the left-hand side is a page from the embroidery book. It's by Zappino. It was written in August 1529. It's currently at the Met Museum, and I interpreted the acorn pattern. If you look at the very top of the left-hand side of the page, you'll see the acorn pattern, and that's the pattern on the top right. And then in the middle of the page on the left, you'll see it looks like double crosses, kind of going up and then down, up and then down. And I've interpreted that pattern as well, and that's on the bottom right. This is another page from that same book, and I've interpreted the pattern. If you look, the second pattern down on the left-hand side, where it looks like two triangles, one upside down and one right side up, and then a little line, and then crosses reflecting off of each other, and then triangles again. That's the pattern on the top right. And then if you count down, see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 patterns down, you'll see it looks like a reflection of crosses on the top and the bottom. That is the pattern that I have interpreted on the bottom right side. This is from an embroidery book from 1530. It is by Tagliente, and it is at the Met Museum. The patterns that I interpreted from this page, the pattern near the top of the page is on the top left-hand side of the page. And then, do you see the double cross pattern on the bottom left? It's about the middle of the page on the right-hand side, that double cross pattern. Let me go back. Do you remember this from 1529? Do you see the pattern on the bottom right from 1529 by Zappino? Yet Tagliente did it in 1530. At this time, if you look at certain books, you'll find that they reused the ink presses for different books. They just shuffled up the pages. That's also why if you look in recipe books from this time period, you will find the recipes might be the same. They've just been put in a different order, added in a couple new recipes, and voila, they have a new book. This is an embroidered sampler at the Met Museum. It's from about 1600, and the pattern that I am interpreted on this page is inside the red circle. It's near the top right-hand side of the sampler, and I've enhanced the embroidery on the top right of the page. And this is an example where you can see some of the stitches are missing, but because it's counted stitch, you can count the threads where they're missing and fill in the line and create the pattern, which I've interpreted and created below. This is from the same sampler, and inside the red circle on the left-hand side is the pattern I interpreted. On the right-hand side is an enhanced picture of that pattern. And again, some of the threads are missing, but because it's counted stitch, we can count where the stitches are missing and find what the pattern would have looked like, and that's what I've put on the bottom right-hand side of the page. From the same Italian sampler, inside the red circle is the pattern that I've enhanced in the middle of the page, and then I've interpreted it and put it on the right-hand side. This particular one, if you notice, some of the threads don't line up quite neatly. And so you can actually count the stitches, because instead of being one continuous line, you'll see where the threads tend to sit next to each other in the same hole, and that helps with counting how many holes in between each stitch, as well as how many stitches per section of the pattern. And this is still the same Italian sampler we've been looking at, and inside the red circle on the top left-hand corner is the pattern that I recreated on the right-hand side. I've enhanced the picture, and then beneath that, because on the sampler it just had that one, what would you call it, a cornstalk, but there was only one, but because of the line at the bottom, this is a pattern that you can add and add and add and create trim around, say, a collar or a cuff. So for the pattern on the bottom, I've put 3 side by side. And from the same embroidered sampler, inside the red circle near the top of the sampler, I have enhanced that picture and then recreated the pattern below. This is another example where the threads are missing in part of the pattern. Actually, if you look near the bottom left corner of the picture in the middle, you'll actually see the thread sitting up on top of the sampler. But this is because it's counted stitch. You can fill in the dots. Think of it like connect the dots. You can fill in the blank spaces and recreate the pattern that was on the sampler. And still the same Italian sampler. Inside the red circle, I've enhanced the picture, and this is very much a case of connect the dots because half the thread is missing. Again, it's counted stitch, so you can count the threads where they're missing and recreate the pattern. And that's what I've done on the bottom right-hand side, is a recreation of the pattern that is found on this Italian sampler. And still working with the same Italian sampler, there were many patterns on this sampler, so it's a great piece to look at. And I've enhanced the picture on the right-hand side and then recreated the pattern below. And once again, if you look on the far right-hand side of the enhanced picture, you'll see part of the threads are missing, but because it's a mirror image from the left side to the right side, you can still recreate that image when creating your pattern. And still working with the same embroidered sampler, I've enhanced the picture on the right-hand side and recreated the pattern below. And here's one more example of a pattern from that embroidered sampler, and I've recreated the pattern, posted it below, and I have even more patterns from this sampler. If you would like to see more patterns, please visit the website on the top left-hand side. Other examples of Italian blackwork from the 16th century is this embroidered fabric. It is at the Museo del Tessuto. If I mispronounced that, please correct me. Inside the red circle on the left-hand side, I have recreated that pattern and put that pattern on the right-hand side. And on that same sampler, you'll see it has a flower inside the red circle, and then I've recreated that pattern and put that on the right side as well. I have other patterns from this sampler. Please follow the link on the top left-hand side. This is an enhanced picture of a much larger sampler at the V&A Museum. It's from the 16th century. And inside the red circle on the bottom right-hand side of the picture on the left, I have included the 2 patterns that are there, and they're in the middle and the bottom right of the page. Now that we're done with Italian, let's work with a little bit with English embroidery. This is, at least in the SCA, it seems to be a very popular, before I forget, the SCA, that's the Society for Creative Anachronism. If you want more information, please visit sca.org. But this is a popular sampler. It is Jane Bostock's sampler from 1598. It's at the V&A Museum. And this is the sampler on the left-hand side. And inside the red circle is the enhanced picture that I have in the middle. And then on the right-hand side is my interpretation of that pattern. This is a painting of Margaret Roper. She was the oldest daughter of the oldest daughter of Sir Thomas More. Her maiden name was Margaret More, and then got married and became Margaret Roper. This painting was done about 1535 to 1536, and it's at the Met Museum. This is another way of finding blackwork patterns. Instead of just simply studying samplers that exist, you can also go to paintings, and especially the Holbein paintings. You can look at some museums, you can enhance the painting and figure out the pattern. You may not be able to count the stitches like you can on an actual sampler, where you can count the missing threads or the number of holes between a stitch, but you can still get the concept of the pattern. And then depending on if it's a sleeve with a really large pattern, if it's a collar with a smaller pattern, you can kind of guesstimate if it was every third hole for a stitch, or if it was every fifth hole for a stitch, if it's a larger pattern. So with this painting of Margaret, I have enhanced her collar in the middle picture, and then I have included my interpretation of that pattern of her collar on the bottom right-hand side. This is a miniature painting of Elizabeth, Lady Audley, from about 1538. It's with the Royal Collection Trust. And with this one, you can see right along the trim, right around the edge of her dress, she's got, it looks like blackwork trim, but because it's a miniature, I'm sure it was difficult to get all the brush strokes just exactly right to get the pattern, but the painter got the basic idea of the pattern. And with that, I recreated what I think the pattern looks like, and that's on the bottom right-hand side. And this is from a sampler at the V&A Museum. It's by, I believe her first name was Sarah Blake. It was done in 1664. And as you can see on the left-hand side, it is very long, very detailed, lots of patterns to study, which is why I color-coded the different patterns so you can have an idea of where to find this specific pattern on this sampler. And this is a case where you can go to the museum website, enhance the picture, and zoom in and actually be able to count the stitches for that pattern. And I have other patterns from this sampler. If you would like to see more patterns from this sampler, please visit my blog. The link is below on the right-hand side. This is, it was done by a German painter. It's Holbein, Hans Holbein the Younger. But I've included it with the English paintings because even though the painting is labeled as Portrait of a Boy with a Marmoset, it's labeled as being from about 1532 to 1535. It's located at the Kunstmuseum. But with this portrait, you will find, if you look up, just do a Google search and look up Edward VI, you will find this painting associated with him. But if you look up Henry Fitzroy, you might also find this painting associated with him. No one knows for sure who this boy is. That's why the painting in the museum is just labeled as being Portrait of a Boy with a Marmoset. But they have it between 1532 to 1535, which to me automatically rules out that it could be Edward VI, because Edward VI wasn't born yet. If memory serves correctly, he was born in 1537, because Anne Boleyn died in 1536. That is when Henry VIII, King Henry VIII, the famous king with 6 wives of England, married his third wife, Jane Seymour, in 1536. She soon became pregnant and then gave birth in 1537 to Edward, who later became Edward VI. But depending on other websites you look at, I have found some websites that associate the year 1541 to this picture. So if he was born in 1537, there might be that chance in 1541 that this could be him, but I still think he looks older than that. If it's Henry Fitzroy, there is a better chance of that because Henry Fitzroy was the illegitimate son born to Bessie Blount, the one recognized illegitimate child that Henry VIII was willing to recognize, and Henry Fitzroy was born in 1519. So if he was born in 1519 and this was painted between 1532 to 1535, then this, to me, looks more like a boy who could be 12, 13, 14, not a boy who hasn't been born yet or a boy who's barely 5. But regardless of which boy it is, if you look at the collar, you can enhance the picture, which I've done on the right-hand side, and you'll see there's like a little ocean wave picture with a line on the bottom and a line on the top. And I've recreated that pattern on the bottom right-hand side. Now on to Portuguese embroidery. This is a page from a booklet of embroidery and drawn work. It's from the 17th century and it's at the Met Museum. And the particular pattern on this page that I have interpreted is inside the red circle on the left-hand side. And I've flipped the picture so it's sitting parallel rather than perpendicular to the ground. It's on the right-hand side. And this is a really good case of, if you look at the lines on the top right side, the picture on the top right side, you'll see on the line, you'll see dark dots every so often. That tells you every dark dot is a stitch. So even though we can't zoom in enough to count the holes in between each stitch, you can tell how many stitches, like if you look on the top of one of those bubbles, or if you want to call it a curve, on top of one of those curves, there are 4 dots. That tells you 4 dots, that's 1 stitch, 2 stitch, 3 stitch, and then you go back down on the curve. So I was able to recreate the pattern on the bottom right side. This is an example of German embroidery. It is from a German embroidery book from 1597, written by Siebenmacher. And although this is not a blackwork pattern, the pattern on the right side was inspired by the pattern on the left because it was from an embroidery book and it is a German pattern. So you can use patterns that existed for, say, brick stitch, and if you want to use it to inspire you to create a blackwork pattern. This is a painting at the Kunsthistorisches Museum. It was painted in 1531, and this is an example of where you can zoom in on the collar and you can study the pattern and recreate it. Can you count the stitches? No, but you can get a basic idea of what the pattern looks like and then recreate it, which I've done on the bottom right side. This is an example of embroidery from the Netherlands. This is a portrait of a young woman from about 1535. It's currently at the Met Museum. And this, if you look at the painting, you can zoom in, you can see blackwork along her collar, along the top part of her shirt, but also along her sleeves and around the cuffs. The problem is, as you zoom in, the pattern starts to become blurred, as you can see on the right-hand side. So it's not perfect, it's not as good as the Holbein paintings, but you can still get a basic concept of what the pattern looks like, which I've recreated on the bottom right side. And for some other embroidery, have you heard of Kasudi embroidery? Here is an example on the right-hand side from Kasudi Patterns, and it is Indian embroidery, which looks, oddly enough, like Egyptian embroidery or blackwork embroidery, or we can call it Holbein stitch, reversible stitch. It's all the same thing. It's counted stitch that is reversible on both sides, well, most times reversible on both sides. Kasudi embroidery dates back to the, if I mispronounced this, I'm sorry, please correct me, Chalukya period from the 6th to the 12th centuries in India. So if you like blackwork embroidery, I highly recommend checking out this embroidery, and I've got the website link at the end right here. If you have questions, if you're interested in paintings or samplers that you saw, here are the websites to look at. And then here are more websites to look at. For the Kasudi patterns, that's the second one on this page. If you're interested in studying Indian embroidery that is just like the European blackwork, if it's just like the Mamluk embroidery. So here is the sampler as you would see it on the Cleveland Museum of Art's website, and I am zooming in, and this is the top left corner, and you can see different colors being used. There is black, there is red, looks like leaves, hearts, feathery looking things. And now I'm just continuing to scroll through the sampler. I'm working my way towards the top right corner. Now I'm kind of going down a bit and over. Like I said, you can see different types of embroidery. Some look like it's reversible stitch, others it's reversible cross stitch. And then there's also an alphabet here, some animals. And then right here it looks like some embroidery was in black silk thread, and those threads have disappeared from the sampler. And now I'm going to zoom in and work on making this leaf. No particular order, the items that you will need for today, you will need pins, your fabric. I will be using linen fabric, scissors, thread. I'm also going to be using a thin yarn, but that's up to you if you want to use the thin yarn or only use the thread, a needle, bias tape, and obviously your slate frame. My slate frame is 15 inches by 15 inches, and as you can see, I'm using a scrap piece of fabric. So first I'm going to trim everything down to make sure that this fabric will fit onto my frame. Once you have your fabric square cut out, next you want to take your bias tape and you're going to cut 2 strips the same length as the fabric. Next, you'll want to unfold the bias tape, and then you're going to line one on the right edge and then the other one on the left edge. So as you can see, I'm unfolding the bias tape, and I've got one corner up here and I'm pinning it down. Okay, one side done. Now time to pin the other side. Now that I've got both sides pinned, now it's time to take your needle and your thread, and you're going to sew up both sides. Right now I'm threading my needle. Now that I've got the thread doubled, I'm going to put knots in at the end of my threads. And with this, the stitches don't have to be neat, they just have to be secure. And to help secure the thread on the other side, I like to take my needle and stick it in between the 2 threads. And then pull it tight. From here, I'm just going to do a simple stitch just to secure the bias tape onto the fabric. Just like that. There is a fold. There's actually 2 folds, but there's a fold right here from where the bias tape had been folded, and I'm actually unraveling that fold, and then that's where my stitches are going. So I have a straight line to follow. And once you have one side stitched up, go ahead and knot your thread, and then get started on the other side. For the pieces of your slate frame, the 2 with the holes on the ends, these are called mortises, which would make these 2 the tenons. The tenon is the piece of wood that will go through the mortise, through the hole. And you want the 2 that have the tape already on there. And from here, I'm going to stitch these onto each other. So if you see, I'm matching up the edge of the fabric with the edge of the tape here. Now once you are done pinning right along here, now it's time to sew it into place. And from here, I am just sewing the fabric onto the tape. Once you're done sewing the one side, go ahead, knot off the end of the thread, and then get started on the other side. And now that this side is sewn on, time to pin it to the other side. Now, time to sew this side. Next, you want to slip the tenon through each. There's one, and here's the second one. Now you'll want to take your 4 pegs and put them in the holes to stretch the fabric. Once your pegs are secure in the holes and your fabric is stretched, I'm going to flip this frame over, and remember that thin yarn from before. You can also use string if you like, and I'm going to cut off a long piece here and thread my needle. And you want to tie it around one corner. What you're going to do is wrap the thread around the right leg and stick it through the bias tape. And then just keep doing that, and it will start to look like spiral lacing going up the leg. And if I can get my knot out, pulling it tight. And now as you go, you'll notice some of the string will start to relax. You'll want to pull it tight as you go up. And now as I come up to the end on the other corner, I'm going to do one more around the leg through the bias tape. And now, if you can see, I've got some loose string through here, so I'm going to go to the very bottom, make sure it's pulled tight, and tighten up each strand as I work my way up the leg. And now that I've done that, now I'm going to knot off this end, so I'm going to wrap it around the leg, there, around the corner, and I'm going to knot it again through the loop, through the middle, put my thumbnail over the knot, and then pull tight. And one more time, just for good measure. And now that my thread is knotted, your corner knotted off. Now you want to wrap the yarn around the leg through the bias tape and just do the same spiral lacing that you did before. And through the bias tape. As you can see, I'm at the other corner, but I've got some loose threads here, so you want to go back to the very beginning, pull tight, hold it in place, pull the next string, hold it tight, next string, and just work your way up. This will help make sure that your fabric, as you can see, it's getting tight like a drum. And once everything is nice and tight, then you just want to knot off this corner. And congratulations, you have dressed a slate frame. I got a basket. Then, instead of my brown paper bag for my beeswax, I got a cute little container. So, instead of my son's pilfered scissors, I got some more historically accurate looking scissors. And instead of keeping my needles in the little package that came from the store, I got this to put my needles in. So, welcome to my discussion today on silk thread colors for the 16th century. I'm primarily going to focus on blackwork embroidery. However, these silk thread colors could be used for other types of embroidery during this time period. So, what colors were used? Well, with that depends on what the item was that you were embroidering. Depending on what you were embroidering, colors that were used were black, brown, red, blue, green, and possibly yellow. These are two samplers. On the left-hand side is an Italian embroidered sampler, and you can see it's pretty much just all done in a brown silk thread. On the bottom right side is an English sampler from about 1598. This is Jane Bostock's sampler, and with it you can see there are greens, there are reds. If you look closely, you can even find some blue as well as some black. So if you notice, these samplers have color in them. Here are some more examples. On the left-hand side, there are 3 pictures, and this is from a booklet of embroidery and drawn work. It's Portuguese from about the early 17th century, and here you can see green, you can see red, and then in the bottom picture, it looks sort of like a yellowish brown color. On the right-hand side is an Italian sampler, and this one is from about the late 16th century, and you can see it has red, it has green. If you're noticing a theme here, samplers during this time period have color, mostly. On the left-hand side is an Italian sampler. This one's also from the 16th century, and on the top you can see it has blue, then it has some green, and near the bottom it has green worked in with red. And on the right-hand side is an English panel of blackwork from somewhere between 1580 and 1620, and this one has just black silk thread. So if you've noticed the theme here, most samplers during the 16th century have color. However, if you are going to be embroidering something that is going to be worn, such as a garment with like the collar around the neck, the cuffs around the wrist, sleeves, a smock, a coif, anything that you will be wearing typically was done in black silk thread. On the left-hand side is a zoomed-in picture of the neck area of Isabella of Spain, and this painting was from about 1500 to 1504. In the middle is an English smock from about 1575 to 1585, and on the right-hand side is the collar of Lady Margaret Butts, and this painting was from about 1541 to 1543, and it's English. So, like I said, if you notice in the samplers, there were lots of color and very little black, lots of blues, greens, reds, but with clothing, it tended to be black silk thread that was the favorite item. Here are some more examples. On the top left-hand side is a painting that's called The Portrait of a Young Merchant. It's from about 1541. Underneath that is The Portrait of a Lady. It's English, from about 1536 to 1540. And I've zoomed in on her cuffs. In the middle is a portrait of a young woman. This is Netherlandish, and it's from about 1535. And you can see some black work up here around the collar, as well as down on her sleeves and on the cuffs. On the right-hand side is a portrait of a boy with a marmoset, and again, I've zoomed in around the collar. One thing to note with this painting, it is labeled as Portrait of a Boy with a Marmoset. However, if you look up Edward VI, a lot of times you will find this portrait of him being associated with Edward VI. Edward VI was the one and only legitimate son of King Henry VIII of England. This painting is from about 1532 to 1535. And more examples of black silk thread on clothing in the 16th century. On the top left-hand side is a portrait of a lady. It's Italian, from about 1520. Underneath that is, if you study any kind of blackwork embroidery, this painting is usually one that will pop up a lot, and it is of Jane Seymour. She was the third wife of Henry VIII. And so it's English, it's from about 1536, and I've zoomed in on the cuffs. Again, you can see it's white linen with black silk thread. In the middle it's a miniature that I've enhanced. It's of Mrs. Jane Small, and it's English, from about 1536. I've enhanced the collar to show the black work around her neck. And on the right-hand side is a portrait of Lady Dacre. Sorry if I mispronounced that, please correct me in the comments below. But this painting is from about 1540, and if you look closely, she has black work around her cuffs as well as around her collar. Again, black work, black silk thread on white linen. But that wasn't always the case. This is Bess of Hardwick, and I believe she had 4 husbands during her lifetime, and each marriage helped her move up in the hierarchical food chain of England. And as you can see with Bess, if you look around her collar, her sleeves, this is all done in red. It is still blackwork embroidery, which is also known as like double running stitch or Holbein stitch. And the reason why it can also be referred to as Holbein stitch is because many of these paintings are either done by Hans Holbein or Hans Holbein the Younger. But this portrait, it is unusual because she has black work done in red, also known as red work. And this particular painting, it is English, and it's from about 1550. If you have any questions or would like to pull up any of these paintings for yourself, this is my Works Cited page, and my Works Cited page continued. For today, I will be using just simple Gutermann silk thread that I bought at Joann Fabrics. And I will also be using just normal cross-stitch material. That way it's easier to see the holes for this instruction. Now when doing blackwork embroidery, you will see I've gone in and out on the first journey, and then on the return journey, you will take your thread and fill in all of the spaces, so that way you end up with a continuous line like here or here. So to show you, actually I will start here. If you can see, my needle is right here. And then I'm just going to do a straight line. So you want to pull it through, but not all of the way. you want to keep a little bit of a tail on the back side, and you will be weaving that tail into your embroidery. So now I've gone down the next hole, and as you can see, I still have that little tail right here. And now I'm going to go up the third hole. So as you can see, I've gone up the first hole, down the second, and now I'm going into the third hole. And on the backhand side, I am making sure that my tail is in between the two threads, so that way it's being secured. And now the needle will go down the fourth hole. And to give you a visual for the back side, I'm going to hold the tail like that. So see, the tail is here, and now I'm moving it over on the other side. And now I'm putting the needle into the next hole, and that will help secure the thread. Like so. And you want to make sure to keep your tail nice and taut. That way it will blend in with the line. And from here, just however your pattern is, like with me, I'm just doing a straight line across. So you just continue with your pattern going from left to right. Then you will start your second journey. So if this was the end of my line, now I'm going to start the second journey, and I will now be working right to left. And from here, I'm just going to fill in every hole. So now I'm going back, and here I'm making sure that my thread is woven in to the thread as it goes through. So with this, if you can see, the thread is on the bottom right here, and then I put it in on the top on this side. That way the tail is sticking in between the thread, so as I pull it tight, it's woven into the pattern. And as you do this, you can start to see your single line starting to appear. And now your line is reversible right there. Now that I'm done with the line, as you can see, I have my thread here, but I need to finish off my end. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to weave it into the line. So I'm taking the needle and going through each stitch, putting the needle underneath the threads, and then pulling through on the other side. Once you are done, I like to give it at least ½ inch to an inch worth, just to make sure everything is not going to unravel later. But once you are done doing this, I'm going to do one more. Then you just want to cut the thread as close to the embroidery as possible without hurting the embroidery. There we go. Before I get started actually embroidering anything, first I like to come up with my pattern. And this right here is the 1598 English Sampler by Jane Bostock. And I've decided to use the pattern here for part of my pattern today. So if you can see, it looks like it's a braided pattern, and it makes a diamond right through here. Now for the center of my pattern, I decided to, if I scroll over here, if you can see, there's a flower here, and there's also a flower here and a flower here. It's all the same flower, and I've decided to incorporate that into the middle of my pattern. And here is my pattern. Here is that braided diamond, and then I've put the flower in the middle. Now, if you're curious how I was able to come up with this pattern on the computer, I was able to count the stitches over here, and then I went to Excel, and up here right underneath font, if you select that and click draw border, and then from here I can create patterns, as I will show you right here. You can click and create whatever pattern you want. thank you for checking out my YouTube channel. If you enjoyed this video and would like to watch more of my videos, please follow the links on the left-hand side. Remember to select thumbs up that you like the video. If you have questions or comments, please post them below. And please click subscribe to be updated when new videos come out.